The mountain had a way of breathing before dawn, not with wind alone, but with a slow, settling sound, like a great animal easing its weight into the earth. Snow lay deep against the cabin walls, pressed there by weeks of steady storms, and the timber logs creaked as they cooled in the early dark. Inside, the woman sat awake, listening. Her name was Eliza Hale. She had learned, over many winters, to tell the difference between harmless sounds and warnings. The crack of freezing sap in the logs meant nothing. The low moan that slid down from the ridge meant snow shifting somewhere far above. But the silence between those sounds mattered most. When the mountain went too quiet, that was when she paid attention. Eliza rose from the narrow bed and pulled on her wool coat, stiff with frost at the seams. She moved without lighting a lamp, guiding herself by memory through the small cabin. Her boots waited by the door. Her mittens hung on a nail. She had placed them there with intention, as she placed everything, because in winter, intention was survival. The stove at the center of the cabin still held warmth from the night before. She laid a hand against its clay surface and felt a steady heat, not roaring, not failing. Good. She opened the iron door just enough to look in. Coals glowed like buried embers of sunrise. She fed them a single split log and closed the door again, slow and careful, so the draft did not steal heat she would need later. Outside, the sky was beginning to thin from black to a hard, pale blue. Eliza stepped onto the packed snow and inhaled. The cold struck her lungs cleanly, without mercy, and she welcomed it. Cold meant clarity. Cold meant the rules had not changed overnight. Below the cabin, the slope fell away into trees heavy with white. Somewhere beyond them, a narrow trail wound down toward the valley settlement, though it had not been used in weeks. No one came up here in winter unless they had no other choice, and no one had come this season at all. That suited most people just fine. When Eliza had first chosen this place, the talk in the valley had been quiet but certain. They did not argue with her outright. They did not forbid her. They simply shook their heads and said little things that added up to the same meaning. Too high, too exposed, too foolish for a woman alone. Eliza had listened without answering. She had learned long ago that explanations were wasted on people who had already decided what was possible. Instead, she had climbed higher, driven her stakes deeper, and begun her work. The cabin had taken 2 summers to finish. The stone stove alone had taken half of one. She had hauled each rock by hand, chosen each one for its shape, its density, the way it would hold heat long after the fire died. She had studied old designs from places even colder than this mountain, designs meant to keep warmth close and steady, not blazing and brief. That stove was the heart of everything now. Eliza walked the short distance to the snow-packed shed where she kept her firewood. She opened the door and inspected the stack, neatly cut, carefully dried, arranged to allow air to move even in deep cold. She counted rows with her eyes, not because she doubted herself, but because counting kept the mind sharp. Enough for several weeks, even if the storms worsened. She closed the shed and turned her face toward the ridge. Clouds were gathering there, low and thick, their undersides dark with promise. Another storm was coming. She had known it since the night before, felt it in the way the cold had sharpened instead of easing. She did not fear storms. She feared unpreparedness. Back inside, Eliza began the morning tasks that anchored her days. She ground dried roots into meal. She sliced bread baked 2 days earlier, its crust hard but its center still soft with stored moisture. She set water to warm on the stove, not boiling yet, just coaxing heat into it. Every movement was economical, practiced, free of haste. As she worked, her thoughts returned to the valley, though she rarely allowed them to linger there. She had lived among those people once. She had known their rhythms, their assumptions. They believed safety came from numbers, from closeness, from walls built side by side. Eliza had learned otherwise. She had learned it the winter her husband had died. Not from cold, not from hunger, from waiting too long for help that never arrived. from believing that someone else would come, that someone else was responsible. When the storm had cut the valley off, when the paths vanished under drifting snow, promises had meant nothing. After that winter, Eliza had changed in ways that were difficult to explain. She had not grown bitter. She had grown precise. Precision had led her to the mountain. The first year alone had been the hardest, not because of labor, but because of doubt. Doubt crept in during long nights when the wind struck the walls like a living thing, when the fire burned low and every sound seemed larger than it was. Doubt whispered the voices of others, reminding her of every warning she had ignored. But doubt, she learned, could be worked through like frozen ground, slow, steady, with the right tools. Now, seasons later, doubt came less often. And when it did, she met it with evidence. The stove held heat through the night. The walls blocked the worst of the wind. The roof shed snow instead of collecting it. Her stores lasted. Her body remained strong. This morning, though, there was something else beneath her calm. Not fear, awareness. She stepped to the small window facing east and wiped a circle in the frost with her sleeve. The light beyond was duller than it should have been at this hour. Snow was already falling, fine and fast, almost invisible unless she focused on it. This would not be a gentle storm. Eliza finished her meal and packed a portion away. Waste had no place here. She checked the seams around the door, pressing her fingers into the moss, chinking, ensuring no gaps had opened. She reinforced one corner where the wind tended to worry at the logs. Small corrections now saved large efforts later. As the day progressed, the storm arrived fully. Snow thickened, driven sideways by gusts that rattled the shutters. The world beyond the windows faded into white motion. Eliza stayed inside, tending the fire, mending a tear in her coat, sharpening tools she might not need but preferred ready. The mountain pressed closer as visibility vanished. Sound changed. The wind no longer moved freely. It collided, rebounded, searched for weaknesses. By evening, the temperature dropped sharply. Eliza felt it not just on her skin, but in the way the cabin responded. Wood contracted. Iron sang faintly as it cooled. She adjusted the stove, adding fuel in measured amounts, keeping the heat even. She thought, briefly, of the valley below, of fires burning too hot in open hearths, of people huddled together, of roofs bearing weight they had not been built to carry. She did not wish them harm. She wished them understanding. Night fell early under the storm. Darkness wrapped the cabin tight, but inside, the stove glowed steadily, its warmth radiating outward, filling the space without urgency. Eliza sat on the bench beside it, hands resting on her knees, listening to the mountain breathe again. The storm roared, but the cabin held. This was only the beginning of winter's true test. She knew that, as surely as she knew her own name, harder days would come, colder nights, storms that would last longer than seemed reasonable. But she had not come here to be reasonable. She had come to endure. And as the fire settled into a deep, reliable burn, Eliza allowed herself a single, quiet certainty. Whatever the mountain sent next, she would be ready. By morning, the storm had not loosened its grip. Snow pressed against the cabin door in a solid wall, packed tight by wind and time. Eliza discovered this when she tried to open it and felt the weight answer back, unmoving. She did not force it. Forcing things in winter led to breaks, and breaks led to problems that multiplied quickly. Instead, she set her shoulder against the doorframe and listened. The storm had changed its voice. It no longer screamed. It muttered. That meant it had settled in, content to stay. The kind of storm that reshaped landscapes slowly, hour by hour, until paths vanished and familiar outlines became foreign. Eliza turned away from the door and checked the stove. The heat had held through the night, just as she had designed it to. The stones were warm to the touch, deep warmth, stored and patient. She fed the fire sparingly. In a long storm, Firewood was not burned for comfort. It was rationed like time. She ate standing up, conserving movement, conserving thought. Outside effort would come later, when it was necessary. For now, the mountain required stillness. Mid-morning light filtered weakly through the small windows, a dull gray that flattened everything it touched. Eliza took down her notebook from the shelf. Its pages were thick and uneven, bound with cord she had twisted herself. Inside were lists, diagrams, notes taken over years, wind directions, snow depths from previous winters, small adjustments she had made, and their results. She turned to a page marked with a notch cut into the edge, extended whiteout conditions. She read the notes carefully, though she already knew them. When storms lasted more than 3 days, the risks shifted. Not hunger, not cold. Isolation itself became the danger. Mistakes crept in when days lost their edges. She wrote the date at the top of a new page, then paused. Dates mattered less here. Still, marking time anchored the mind. She wrote it anyway, and added a short line beneath. Storm fully settled. Visibility near zero. As if summoned by her attention, a sound reached her ears. Faint, out of place, Eliza froze. It was not wind. Wind was everywhere. Constant. Layered. This was singular. A short, hollow sound, carried and swallowed quickly. She moved to the eastern window and wiped away frost again. Snow streamed past, endless and blinding. She leaned closer, straining her ears. There it was again, not close, but not imagined. Eliza's jaw tightened. She did not jump to conclusions. Panic invented sounds, but preparation required acknowledgement. She reached for her coat and boots, then stopped herself. Not yet. First, she checked the stove again. She banked the fire carefully, ensuring it would hold steady if she was gone longer than expected. She laid out extra fuel within reach of the bench. Only then did she dress fully, layering wool, leather, fur, each piece chosen for function rather than weight. She strapped on her snowshoes and took the shovel from its hook. At the door, she paused. Going out during a storm was never wise, but neither was ignoring uncertainty. She cracked the door open just enough to push snow aside, working slowly until she had cleared a narrow passage. Cold rushed in, sharp and immediate. The storm seized at her clothing like a living thing. Eliza stepped out. Visibility was worse than she had expected. The world ended a few paces from the cabin, swallowed by moving white. She planted her feet firmly, orienting herself by instinct and memory. She turned her face toward where the sound had come from. She listened again. Nothing. She stood there longer than comfort allowed, letting the mountain reveal itself. Wind shifted. Snow hissed across hard surfaces. Somewhere far off, ice cracked under its own weight. Then, faintly, again. Eliza exhaled slowly. It was a call. Weak, uneven, human. Her first instinct was irritation, quickly followed by resolve. Someone had climbed higher than sense allowed. Someone had misjudged the storm, the mountain, or both. She did not curse them. Cursing wasted breath. She moved. Each step was deliberate. Snowshoes spread her weight, but the drifts were deep and deceptive. She followed the contour of the slope rather than cutting straight across, avoiding areas where snow might give way. Her world narrowed to what lay directly ahead. The next step, the next breath. The sound came again, closer now. A voice strained thin by cold and fear. "Hello," Eliza answered without shouting. "Hold where you are." She hoped they could hear the steadiness in her tone. Panic fed on uncertainty. She advanced until a shape resolved from the white. A figure crouched near a cluster of half-buried rocks, arms wrapped tightly around their body. A woman, younger than Eliza, her face red with cold, eyes wide with exhaustion. No injuries. That was the first thing Eliza noted. No blood, no twisted limbs, just cold, and fear. "You can stand?" Eliza asked. The woman nodded, though it looked like effort. "I think so." "Good," Eliza said. "We're going uphill." The woman hesitated. "I was trying to go down." "That's why you're here," Eliza replied, not unkindly. "Follow my steps." "Exactly." She did not rush. Rushing led to falls. She set a pace the woman could manage, speaking occasionally, not to fill silence, but to keep the other focused. The cabin emerged slowly, its dark shape solid against the storm. Relief washed over the woman's face at the sight of it. Inside, warmth closed around them like a held breath finally released. Eliza shut the door firmly and guided the woman to the bench beside the stove. She stripped off the woman's outer layers with practiced hands, replacing them with dry wool kept for such moments. "You'll warm slowly," Eliza said. "That's important." The woman nodded, teeth chattering. I thought I could make it before dark." Eliza handed her a cup of warm water, not hot. "The mountain does not care what we think." They sat in silence for a time, the only sound the storm battering the walls and the soft crackle of the fire. Gradually, color returned to the woman's face. Her breathing steadied. "My name is Mara," she said eventually. "Eliza, I didn't know anyone lived up here." Eliza allowed herself a thin smile. "Most don't." Mara looked around the cabin, taking in the thick walls, the stove, the careful order of everything. "They said you were unusual." "They say many things," Eliza replied. As the hours passed, the storm showed no sign of easing. Eliza prepared a simple meal and shared it without comment. Mara ate hungrily, then slowed as warmth settled into her bones. By nightfall, the storm intensified again, wind howling with renewed force. Eliza secured the shutters and checked the roof supports from inside, listening for strain. Everything held. Mara slept curled on a pallet near the stove, breathing evenly. Eliza remained awake longer, tending the fire, alert to every shift in sound. Another presence in the cabin changed the balance of things. Not dangerously, but responsibility always sharpened awareness. She thought of the valley again, of how word would travel once the storm broke, of how people would ask questions they had never asked before. For now, none of that mattered. Outside, the mountain continued its slow, relentless work. Inside, Eliza Hale held the line against it, just as she always had. The storm did not end the next day, nor the day after that. Time inside the cabin stretched and thinned, measured not by sunrise or sunset, but by the rhythm of tending the fire and the quiet cycles of rest. Eliza marked each morning by clearing a small section of the window, just enough to confirm what she already knew. White, moving, endless. Mara woke late on the second morning, her body still reclaiming warmth and strength. Eliza let her sleep. Recovery was not something to rush. When Mara finally stirred, blinking against the dim light, Eliza handed her a mug and waited while she drank. "I don't know how far I walked," Mara said softly. "I lost the trail before noon." Eliza nodded. "That happens. I thought I heard someone shouting earlier." From below, Eliza paused, then shook her head. "The wind carries tricks. If there were others, they would not last long out there." Mara's face tightened. "I didn't mean—" "I know," Eliza said, "but hoping for help that isn't coming wastes energy. We focus on what is here." That became the shape of their days. Eliza set Mara to small, careful tasks once her hands stopped shaking, sorting kindling, rolling bandages, melting snow in measured batches so as not to cool the stove too quickly. Each task restored a little more confidence, a little more presence. At first, Mara watched Eliza constantly, as if afraid she might vanish if not observed. Eliza did not comment on it. Trust, she knew, arrived slowly in places like this. On the fourth day, the storm changed again. It did not lessen. It deepened. The wind slowed but grew heavier, pushing snow downward instead of sideways. The sound against the roof became a constant pressure, a dull, smothering weight. Eliza climbed the interior ladder and pressed her ear to the beams. Too much accumulation. She climbed down and reached for her coat. "I need to clear the roof," she said. Mara stiffened. "In this? Yes, that's dangerous." Eliza met her gaze. "So is waiting." She dressed carefully, double-checking every strap and seam. Before opening the door, she placed extra wood beside the stove and adjusted the damper to hold heat longer. "If I am not back within the count of 100 breaths, add 1 small log," she said. "No more." Mara swallowed and nodded. Outside, the storm pressed down like a held breath. Eliza climbed onto the roof using the side supports she had built for exactly this reason. She moved slowly, sweeping snow away in sections, never clearing too much at once. Balance mattered more than speed. The mountain loomed unseen, but its presence was unmistakable. Snow shifted underfoot. The air tasted heavy. Eliza worked until her shoulders burned and her breath fogged the fur around her face. She counted strokes, counted breaths. When the roof was clear enough to relieve the strain, she descended. Inside, Mara was standing by the stove, eyes fixed on the door. Relief softened her features when Eliza stepped in. "You did well," Eliza said, meaning more than one thing. That night, the fire burned low and steady. The cabin creaked but held. Snow continued to fall, but less insistently. On the 5th day, silence arrived. Not peace, just absence. Eliza woke before dawn and knew immediately. The storm had spent itself. The mountain rested under its new weight, reshaped and unfamiliar. She cleared the window and saw sky for the first time in days. Pale, cold, still. Mara joined her quietly. "Is it over?" "For now." They ate, then dressed for work. Eliza did not suggest Mara remain behind. Strength returned faster when tested carefully. Outside, the world had changed. Drifts towered where paths once lay. Trees bent low, branches locked in ice. The trail toward the valley was gone entirely, erased as if it had never existed. Mara stared. "How will I get back?" "Not today," Eliza said. "And not alone." They spent hours digging, clearing the door fully, opening vents, checking the shed. One corner had collapsed under the weight of snow, but the wood inside remained dry. Eliza rebuilt the wall without complaint, using snow itself to insulate the gap. By afternoon, the sun broke through briefly, a weak silver disk that offered no warmth but lifted the spirit nonetheless. They stood together, looking down the slope. "You built this for storms," Mara said. "Didn't you?" Eliza nodded. "Storms reveal what we actually prepared for." That evening, as they sat by the fire, Mara spoke again. "They told stories about you in the valley, that you were stubborn, that you refused help." Eliza smiled faintly. "I refused assumptions." Mara hesitated. "They said no one could live alone up here, that it was only a matter of time. And now," Mara looked around the cabin, at the stove, the walls, the careful order. "Now I think they didn't understand what living means." The next days were spent reclaiming movement. Eliza cut steps into drifts, marked new routes with poles she had stored for this purpose. Mara followed, learning by doing, her confidence growing with each successful task. They spoke more then, not of the storm, but of choices, of the valley's closeness, its noise, of the mountain's demands and honesty. On the 9th day, they saw smoke rising far below. Someone had reached the valley edge again. Mara felt it before Eliza said anything. "They'll come looking." "Yes. What will you do?" Eliza considered the question carefully. "What I always do. Tell the truth." When the first figures arrived days later, they came slowly, cautiously, disbelief written into every step. They stared at the cabin as if it were a thing that should not exist. Eliza met them outside, Mara at her side. They asked questions, many of them. How had she survived? How had the cabin held? Why had she stayed? Eliza answered plainly. No boasting, no softness. Some listened, some did not, but all of them looked at the stove when they went inside. All of them felt the warmth that did not scorch or fade. All of them noticed how the walls kept the wind at bay. When they left, the mountain felt quieter again. Mara stayed longer, long enough to learn the systems, long enough to help reinforce what the storm had tested, long enough to decide, I may not stay forever, she said one evening, but I won't forget this. Eliza nodded. That is enough. Winter still held the mountain in its grip. Hard days still lay ahead, but something had shifted, subtle and lasting. The mountain woman was no longer a rumor. She was proof. Winter did not release the mountain all at once. It loosened its hold in small concessions, a longer stretch of daylight, snow that fell straight down instead of sideways, the first soft drip from the eaves at midday before freezing again by evening. Eliza noticed each change without celebration. Change, like hardship, was something to be met attentively, not emotionally. Mara noticed too, though she reacted differently. She stood longer at the window. She lingered outside after chores, face turned toward the pale sun, as if reminding herself that the sky still existed beyond storms. They had settled into a rhythm that no longer felt temporary. Mara rose early now without prompting. She learned how to read the stove by sound alone, how to tell when the fire needed air or restraint. She learned where Eliza stored the tools meant only for deep winter and why they were never touched casually. She learned the difference between fatigue and danger, and Eliza, in her quiet way, learned too. She learned that teaching did not weaken her self-reliance. It clarified it. Explaining why she had built something a certain way forced her to revisit the reasoning, to test it again. The mountain respected that kind of honesty. Word from the valley came sporadically. Travelers arrived in cautious pairs, never alone now. They came with questions disguised as observations. It's warmer than I expected. You must burn a great deal of wood. This stove is unusual. Eliza answered only what was asked directly. She did not invite admiration, nor did she deflect it. She treated curiosity the same way she treated cold. Acknowledged, managed, never indulged. Some visitors brought small offerings, salt, cloth, iron nails salvaged from older structures. Eliza accepted what was useful and returned what was not. Trade required balance. Mara watched these exchanges closely. They listened to you, she said one night after the last visitors had gone. They listened to outcomes, Eliza replied. People always do. Late one afternoon, after a stretch of rare calm, Eliza noticed a sound she had not heard in months. Water, moving freely beneath ice. She followed it downslope to where a narrow channel had opened, dark and alive. Spring would come, not soon, but surely. With the shift in season came decisions that could no longer be delayed. Mara knew it before Eliza spoke. The mountain had a way of surfacing truths without words. I should go back, Mara said quietly one morning. Before the trails change again. Eliza nodded. She had already prepared a small bundle of supplies, dried food, extra cord, a map drawn not as the valley remembered the mountain, but as it truly was now. You'll take the higher route, Eliza said. It looks longer. It isn't. Mara accepted the bundle with steady hands. I won't forget this place. Eliza studied her for a moment, then added one more item. A small iron hook, curved and smoothed by years of use. For testing snow ahead of you, she said, and ground that looks settled but isn't. Mara closed her fingers around it. Thank you. They did not embrace. They did not need to. Eliza watched from the ridge as Mara descended, her figure growing smaller against the vast white until it blended into the land itself. Only then did Eliza turn back toward the cabin. Solitude returned, but it felt different now. Not heavier, just quieter. Spring came slowly, as it always did at that height. Snow retreated in patches, revealing dark earth and flattened grasses. The roof shed its final burden. The shed stood firm. The stove continued its patient work on cold mornings and damp evenings. Eliza repaired what the winter had worn. She replaced timbers where needed, reinforced others that had proven themselves. She took notes, always notes. The mountain rewarded those who paid attention. Visitors returned more often as the trails reopened. Some came with genuine interest, others with poorly disguised disbelief. "You really stayed through it all?" one man asked, eyes darting to the ridgeline. "Yes." "Alone?" Eliza met his gaze calmly. "No one survives anywhere alone." He frowned, not understanding, and she did not elaborate. Late in the season, a small group arrived with a purpose more solid than curiosity. They brought tools, wood, stone. "We want to build better," one of them said. "Down below, and maybe higher up too." Eliza considered them carefully. Building is the easy part. Commitment is harder. They stayed. Not all of them, but enough. Eliza did not oversee their work. She worked alongside them when it mattered and stepped back when it did not. She corrected mistakes quietly. She allowed some to fail safely, so the lesson would last. A second stove was built in the valley that year. Not a copy, but an adaptation. Thick-walled, thoughtful, slow-burning, it held through the next winter. By the time snow returned in earnest, the mountain felt different again. Not tamed, never that, but acknowledged. Eliza stood outside one evening as the first heavy flakes began to fall, her breath rising in a steady plume. The cabin behind her glowed softly, warmth contained, deliberate. She thought of the woman she had been years ago, waiting, trusting that help would arrive simply because it should. The mountain had taught her otherwise. It had taught her that survival was not defiance, but agreement, an understanding of limits, and the discipline to live within them without resentment. As winter closed in once more, Eliza moved through her preparations with the same care as always. Firewood stacked, stores checked, roof supports tested. Nothing rushed, nothing neglected. The mountain breathed. And this time, when the storm came, and it did, as it always would, it found a place already shaped to meet it, not by chance, but by a woman who had learned to listen, endure, and remain. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale, where destiny and courage collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider to hype our video to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.